A human? A bot? Application Firewalls, WAFs, versus Web Behavior Analytics for finding the biggest threats to your website. Discussing today's topic will be Eric Ogren, Senior Security Analyst, 451 Research, and Rami Essaid, CEO and co-founder of Distil Networks. Eric Ogren, Senior Security Analyst in the Enterprise Security Practice at 451 Research, is the industry's thought leader behind Web Behavior Analytics. Prior to joining 451 Research, Eric held marketing leadership positions with security vendors such as RSA Security, Sequation, Tizor, and Okena. Eric holds a BS in mathematics from the University of Massachusetts and an MS in computer science from Boston University. You can follow him on Twitter at Eric Ogren. Rami Essaid is the CEO and co-founder of Distil Networks, the first easy and accurate way to identify and police malicious website traffic, blocking 99.9% of bad bots without impacting legitimate users. With over 12 years in telecommunications, network security, and cloud infrastructure management, Rami continues to advise enterprise companies around the world, helping them embrace the cloud to improve their scalability and reliability while maintaining a high level of security. Follow Rami on Twitter at Rami Essaid.
The agenda is to talk about the new landscape of bots, the advanced persistent bots that we've categorized. What impact do they have on your security and fraud, and how your existing tool set might be able to help, might not be able to fill the gaps 100%, and what applied web behavior analytics can mean for your business. Now, the very foundation, before we get started, I think it's important to define what is a bot to help the audience understand exactly what we're talking about here. And a bot is just any kind of automated computer program across the web. It's mimicking a transaction that a human would make, but it's done so in a programmatic way. There's a lot of good and bad bots that exist out on the web. You create your website, but what we found is that 50% of the traffic that's accessing your website is automated. Of that, you have the good bots like search engines and third-party tools that are aggregating content for the purposes of social media or search engine results. But then you have a lot of nefarious bots, and that's what we want to concentrate on today. That makes up about 20% of your web traffic. So 1 in 5 users across your site is some sort of malicious bot. These automated bad bots have gotten to be more and more sophisticated over time. Whereas 10 years ago, it might have been pretty easy to catch and identify a bad actor. What we found in our latest bot report is that 88% of bad bots that access your website are categorized in this advanced persistent bot category. And what advanced bot means is that it's mimicking human behavior, it supports cookies, it's some sort of browser automation. Or persistent means that it's hard to get rid of it, whether it's rotating through IPs or hiding behind proxies or across the residential networks. They are very, very difficult to identify at the IP level. And so when we break down this taxonomy of what are these bad bots really like, what we found is 53% of the malicious bots that we've identified can actually load and execute JavaScript. They can interact with your site like a true browser, whether that's using a tool like Selenium or Phantom or automating a true web browser through malware. The majority of bots are real web browsers and that can execute JavaScript. Even higher of a majority of those bots are mimicking true human behavior. That means they're pausing in between requests. That means that they are supporting cookies and spoofing true user identities. When you look at that number, you find that it becomes harder and harder to set up simple checks to block these bots. Another really key differentiator with how bots have started acting nowadays is that bots have started distributing their footprint across a wider swath of IPs. In the past, bots were pinned to one IP at a time, and in doing so, you could set up an access control list to block the malicious requests. But what we found is that 73% of bots now use multiple IP addresses. 20% of those use over 100 IP addresses in their attack. So if you're trying to block a bot based on an IP, you're ending up playing a game of IP whack-a-mole because they're just too dynamic to be able to block using one IP. Another way that bots obfuscate their identity is to randomize the user agents that they're using. So we find that in conjunction with accessing a specific resource or coming in from a specific IP, a lot of bots, and 36% of which use multiple user agents in their attack. Now, these user agents aren't random, made-up user agents. They're actually correlated to the most popular browsers. So it's almost impossible to differentiate between a legitimate browser request and a bot spoofing their user agent. In fact, in 2015, the breakdown is listed above with 26% being from Chrome, 17% being from spoofing Firefox, 12% spoofing Internet Explorer, and 5% spoofing Safari. And that breakdown correlates with what true web traffic actually looks like. That's an overview of how these bad bots are made up. Now let's talk a little bit about what these bad bots are doing. Why has anybody building bots to begin with? So we address that 19% of your web traffic is made up of these bad bots. And these bad bots are doing a number of different things, whether it's committing fraud, stealing information, trying to brute force their way into your web applications, or bringing your servers to their knees. There's a number of different ways that bad bots can hurt you. So let's talk a little bit about some of the more prevalent ways. The first is web scraping. Scraping comes in a couple of forms, but it's the collection of application content or data. It's using bots to harvest information. And so one of the ways that bots do this, or one of the reasons bots do this, is to steal unique content or data. Think about a scenario in which Yelp or White Pages has publicly made available a plethora of information that's proprietary to them. The business listings that they have are their bread and butter, and they want to protect that from somebody harvesting that en masse. And so you would want to stop web scrapers from being able to siphon off all of that information. Another thing that web scrapers do is specific to the e-commerce vertical, and that's price scraping. Price scraping is when a competitor indexes your entire inventory, identifies what you have in stock, what you don't, how much are you selling it for, and then can create an automated strategy to adjust their pricing based on your inventory and prices. This makes you less competitive and gives them a competitive advantage. Another very important way that hackers and bad guys leverage bots is vulnerability scanning. And that's when they crawl and fuzz your application to find weaknesses and possible vulnerabilities in your web app. This is the first step in how hackers identify vulnerabilities in a web application, and they can hone in on the attack, giving hackers an advantage because they don't have to test every individual field. In fact, they can crawl your entire site in minutes and find the areas in which they can concentrate to penetrate your application as quickly as possible. Another thing that allows a hacker to achieve scale is the credential cracking, credential stuffing, or all-around account takeover that are leveraged by bot attacks. This is where a hacker can either try to brute force their way into a known login or take a list of usernames and passwords, such as the LinkedIn breach or the Ashley Madison breach, and upload them into a bot and find where the overlaps exist in your login page as the ones that have been breached. This allows them to compromise your user accounts without ever actually penetrating your system. Somebody else's breach all of a sudden becomes your problem. And again, this gives the hacker a lot of leverage because they can do this en masse very, very quickly. Leverage and automation is the key here behind bots, and the next threat is exactly that as well. Carding, card cracking, and cashing out fraudulent credit cards is another way that bad guys leverage bots. They can either use bots to validate fake credentials, such as taking a stolen credit card number and figuring out the correct CID and zip code associated with it, or taking a list of known stolen credit card information and seeing which credit cards are still valid and which ones aren't. Then they can even automate the next step and take those stolen credentials, those valid credit cards at work, and automating the cashing out across your site. That's going to result in fraudulent chargebacks back to your business, things that you should have been able to stop from the get-go. Another bot attack that we see very, very often is spamming, where bots plant malicious links in comments or just try to spam your forums in general. Spam can be annoying to very, very dangerous, and it can impact your user experience and cost you a lot of legitimate users. Now, the one key thing to remember is bot attacks don't just attack your web application. Bot attacks can also target the APIs that power your web apps or native mobile apps. When you block bots across your web application, immediately the bad guys look for other entry points into your site or into your database and backend. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to target the API endpoints directly. So it's important to not just put a strong protection against your web app, but also look at your security posture holistically and include a security strategy for your APIs as well.
First of all, let me apologize because Rami was the star, and he's a tough act to follow. I should have insisted I go first, but appreciate you attending. And let me just talk a little bit about the business side and what's happening in the market, some of what I'm seeing at 451. And we'll be talking about web behavior analytics and copies of reports as well. And I'm actually quite interested in your feedback on all of this. So it's cool stuff. And I can already tell actually from the last poll questions, it was pretty interesting to see more than half going for the secondary authentication request. And that actually is a strong thing because it means you just don't want alerts and have work for security teams to do or get people in the way. You want your users to self-help and to be able to determine, whether it's a human or a bot and get along with their business. So I think that's a really, really nice sign. Anyway, let me start with what I've got here. I was going to look for a report I did when I was an early analyst back at the Yankee Group, and the web has changed a lot, and I just couldn't find the report. But I did see something where I was quoted by Bob Violino, who's I think writes for, still active in the security space, and he says today's well-connected applications need more than just firewalls, and basically saying that application security gateways, WAFs, can't grow up fast enough. So that's a direct quote. I thought was beautiful. One of the cool things about it, what Bob wrote, is that he did this on May 1st, 2004. It's over 10 years ago, which just blew me away. It's amazing sometimes, the need to innovate and the need to keep up. The attackers change all the time, and it's just dramatic. I mean, you kind of got a sense as Rami was going through his stuff. They've got great tools. They have great distribution mediums. They have an economic business model that works. It's just staggering how good they are. And here we are, 10, 12 years later, and we're just catching on to the fact that the most dangerous attacks to your websites, aren't taking advantage of vulnerabilities and using exploit code. They're taking advantage of business logic. They're just using the website functionality against itself. in automated ways that allow them to tromp through your site and help themselves to confidential data or fraudulent transactions and other ways of disrupting the business. So this is a little bit of background as we go through this. I started with PCI, actually, the payment card industry specification. I don't know how this slide doesn't look right, but you should see the PCI Security Standards Council logo on top. And I chose something from 2008 and the version 1.2 of the spec. And section 6.6 is the section that really refers to web app security. And the main thing there is, even in 2008, it's all about software defects. And PCI actually gave you a choice of how you wanted to respond to the requirements. You could do vulnerability assessments, i.e. scan your websites, fix the code, integrate with DevOps, and treat it that way. Or you could put a web app firewall in front in the hopes that it could do some virtual patching and some recognition of some of the most common vulnerabilities. But the thing is, none of it really talked about business logic. It was totally vulnerability and exploit oriented, and we'll see that in some of the specifics. So with OWASP, which is similar vendors doing the same type of project, you can see in 2010, 2013, not a lot of change going on in the world. The big problems are that there's a bot at the browser end. Not too many humans are entering SQL code, and you can see over the course of 3 years the big worries from OWASP and PCI. SQL injection, cross-site scripting. You can see the list there, but it's pretty common. The one thing that struck me was the fact that, like I said, everything begins with a piece of code at the other end. So I'm not suggesting so much that web behavior analytics replace WAFs, because basically many of you have WAFs now and you need them for compliance. You probably have them in passive mode as an auditing capability, but you're also probably at the point where you realize from a security standpoint, you need something that's looking at the logic and looking at automated actions, not so much looking at the software defects. I mean, honestly, one of the reasons the WAF market hasn't gone the way it has is because if you're going to fix something, you fix it in the code. And that makes sense. The attacks that Rami was talking about, you can't fix in the code. I mean, people you need to log in. You need to be able to navigate through your websites, and that's just that. But we are seeing some tractions. I don't want to beat up WAFs and the standards bodies too much. Standards tend to follow the market anyway. But here we are. The new PCI specification came out in April, just not quite 2 months ago. And there's a little softening in the language. You still have a choice. You can scan and treat vulnerabilities and do the DevOps thing. Only now, instead of saying a WAF, it kind of says, well, for example, a WAF. It's starting to be a bit broader and looking for technical solutions that prevent web-based attacks. So I think that's actually a pretty strong statement, and it's to PCI's credit, it's hard to change direction like that. I mean, you're basically admitting that you've got to do a bit more and that the standard has to be a bit broader based to be able to reflect what's happening in the real world. And we're seeing that from OWASP as well, which is it's got a big acronym, but it's like Open Web Application Security Project, I think is what it stands for. But it is pretty easy to find their documents online, and I've given you links here. They've actually moved on as well with what they call an ontology. So basically, they needed a common set of definitions for many of the attacks that Rami was talking about. For me, I tend to look at the blue circles because the details, and it gets a little close. What some of them can be. But the biggest groupings you see are anti-automation, i.e. bots, and abusive functionality, which tend to be also bot-driven, really. And the abusive functionality is, following the rules, just doing too much of it. So if you look at those and think of your own websites and your own need for security, think of the impact of automation. Think of people. If a bot actually is able to get into an authenticated account and take it over, it can do anything it wants on your website because it has permissions to do it. So how do you detect that? You'll never get it from looking for vulnerabilities. Your only chance is to have a behavioral approach and to be able to look at things and correlate them over time to be able to get a good model going for what's happening with your websites. The other nice thing about WBA is that this is a 451 poll. We do what's called Voice of the Enterprise. We ask and do quantitative research. And in this case, it was just fascinating to me the difference between vendor perception and user perception of what's really important in a security product. And it's actually kind of funny. The users say, "Hey, I need to support mission-critical processes," and the vendors don't even have that. Their responses don't even show on the list. The users talk about working with the background, don't involve the users, integrate with other products. The vendors tend to talk about out-of-the-box capability experiences and usability and ease of deployment. So it's very much of security teams on the enterprises, such as yourself, looking in one direction, and vendors in the traditional security markets, looking in other directions. Cool thing about WBA, Web Behavior Analytics, is there's no place where security aligns with the business and needs to align with the business more than websites. That is the face of your business to your supply chain, to your employees, to your customers, and being able to separate users from bots is an absolutely critical first step to be able to support the business. So what makes Web Behavior Analytics special? First of all, it takes dead aim on automated bots. It really is. It all starts with, is this a human or is this a software automation at the other end? Rami was great. I mean, if you see browsers running on Linux machines or different patterns of access, it just sort of is a red flag that these can't be people. This has to be a machine probing away at my website. Let's figure out how we want to deal with it. In a lot of cases, as you guys picked up on, asking for like a CAPTCHA or some other type of authentication really is a way of thwarting the bots. They get an unexpected response and they don't quite know what to do with it, how to deal with it, and away they go. But it's the only practical way of detecting abuses of business logic. You just have to be able to look and see who's using the system and what their usage patterns are like, and be able to detect the anomalies and act on those. Technically, what we see is there is the time dimension is very important. So there is an element of time of, have we seen this machine before? Are we looking at things and building the right kind of inferences as to what's happening with the user? And those are things that security products that look for exploits tend not to have. Those types of approaches are very performance, hit or miss. It's like, okay, let's scan, let's look, make a decision. I either recognize it or I don't, and move on. But you need a little bit of time to be able to figure out if it's a human, if it's a bot, if you've got some web behavior that's not acceptable for you. I don't see at this point, I don't see WBA, and I don't recommend that it's a replacement for web app firewalls at all. I mean, you need WAFs for compliance. You have them; they're doing good things for you. They just do different things, and I think, in my opinion, WBA has moved past them by looking at the bigger problem of automated users. But that's that. So this is a screen I like. When I talk about business logic, sometimes it gets pretty simple, and it starts with just a login password. It's a great example of how you can abuse business logic. And if you think about it, every website that you authenticate a user tells you if you're in or not, and they have to. You put in a credential, a username, a password, and it tells you you're in. Use your page, or it tells you you're not. And so if you are an attacker, it's a beautiful thing. All you do is stuff some credentials in there and let the website tell you yay or nay. Now, you do need to have research available with your WBA vendor because the attackers aren't stupid. They change, so they know accounts might get shut down. So as they take their list and farm it out to the bot community, they might say, okay, you only try once or try twice. So don't lock the accounts, don't leave tracks. But statistically, because we'll have tens of thousands of bots, probing away, we're going to cover every username, every credential we have, and we're going to have a good chance of finding some that works. They only need 3% hit rate when you're starting with like 100,000 or 1 million credentials gives you a lot to work with. So bottom line is this is the type of thing we're thinking about. So it's web scraping. The bot just follows the links. They follow what the website gives them. Once they log in with and find a valid username, then they just inherit all the permissions and all the capabilities of that user. Off they go. It's not a bad thing, and they never have to write exploit code. So let me see. And there are some neat toolkits. So actually, Rami did a pretty good job of running through these. So I guess I'll give an example here or there. The credential stuffing and account takeover, to me, are related. The credential stuffing is using a tool, maybe like a Sentry MBA, where you buy a big list of usernames and passwords of credentials that have been stolen somewhere, and you launch them at a site. You give them to the bot farm, and you say, you try these, and the bots probe away, and they probably do some sort of randomization to make sure that they're hard to track and harder for the website to determine that it's being subjected to a credential stuffing attack. And really, honestly, it's just sheer arithmetic and economics. The attacker is looking for a 3 to 4% return, and if they find it, then they have a list of valid usernames and passwords that they can then use to enter privileged areas of the sites to scrape confidential data, to purchase things, or be able to copy sensitive data and resell it on the market. They can basically do anything they want. So those two are very much related. And Rami had a good point, and he kind of took away one of my examples. Is one of the things about duplicate credentials, most users use the same passwords and usernames. I mean, the username might be their email address, and they'll use the name of their cat or something. But a lot of times, what I'm seeing in the market is if one company gets breached and their passwords get exposed, those passwords are valid at competitive organizations. So if you pick your favorite store, and it gets breached, there's probably a good chance that those credentials will be used at a similar type of store, and so the problem becomes yours, even though it was some other vendor's, other enterprise's security incident. But you're still going to own the problem. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that the latest example is Mark Zuckerberg. He had his LinkedIn password was the same as his Twitter password and the same as his Pinterest password. And when the LinkedIn breach happened a couple months back, somebody discovered that through automation that they could use the same password on Twitter and Pinterest. And it was something as simple as I think. But they were able to hijack his public Twitter and Pinterest accounts.
A Harvard guy used But actually, that's a good point. It's just human nature, right? Because who can remember different passwords and funny characters and all that kind of stuff? They get reused, and once one place gets hacked, you may not even know it as your business, and your accounts are going to be taken over, and then all of a sudden you're on the hook for whatever evil things that attacker does. One of my favorites was. And I'm not sure if this is one of your customers or not, Robbie, but it was the web scraping, price scraping scenario. And same idea. It just uses an application that's designed for humans that once a bot gets in there, it just causes havoc. In this case, it's a hospitality industry. It was a cruise line. And the way their website worked is it was built for humans, demand pricing. So when a human would click on a cabin, it would put a reservation hold on it for 15 minutes because it knows it takes time for the human to make a decision. Maybe they have to run and get their wallet. They have to fumble through their wallet to find a credit card that's not maxed out, and then they have to, do the bookings. So the website would actually reserve that cabin for 15 minutes as soon as the user clicked on it. Well, what happened, what this company found was that once bots started crawling through it because of the demand pricing, they wanted to be able to, competitors and aggregators wanted to know what the latest price was, for their own business. If you just picture a shipwreck, basically all the links for each deck and each cabin, the bot would automatically click on the cabins to look at the price, and it would initiate a 15-minute reservation hold. So basically, that company's whole ship and then fleet was being taken offline for reservations by bots that were going through scraping prices. I just love that thing. It's designed for humans. They didn't check for bots. Well, they check for bots now, and I think they are a Distil customer. But it has a very, very serious business impact, and it was something that they had to address it, and they addressed it with the anti-bot capability. And this one is another example of unintended side effects. It's, the titles is my mistake, and apologize for that. But what it is it shows two lines. It's credit card fraud rates in the UK. And I put this in here because we're going to be seeing this same phenomenon in the US. So if you have an e-com site, know that your card not present fraud, i.e. fraud through websites, is going to start escalating. So what this shows is in the UK, PIN cards were introduced in 2002, 2003, and they started shifting the liability. But as it became more difficult to duplicate credit cards because of the PINs, you see that line of card present fraud dropping way down to about 10. It looks like it's asymptotic to about 10% now. But the card not present fraud through websites, which had been kind of low before the chip and PIN, now skyrockets. It was probably low before because to do something through a website you have to put in a shipping address and there's a bit more risk to the attacker. But now that you can't replicate a card, it's a lot easier to go through websites and do a CNP type of fraud. So if you're in the U.S., expect to see this very same curve. It's happened in the UK. There's a similar curve in Canada. That's a little bit more recent, and we're going to. There's no doubt in my mind we're going to see the same thing happening here in the U.S. All right, let me just wrap up. I got three quick ones, and I want to leave time for questions and respect your times. The web behavior analytics market is moving, and I'm writing about it now. I actually give it to my copy editors tomorrow, so it'll be out in about a week. But a lot of vendors, mostly young, because it's a new phenomenon. It's actually looking at the web security problem in a much healthier way, a much more scalable way. Vendors are healthy. They're finding solutions. They're finding big strategic, corporate-wide deals. And honestly, I'm seeing about a new vendor every other month. So it's a pretty lively space, and it reflects, in my opinion, an overall trend towards more probabilistic models. It's not, and you saw that too with authentication in your responses. It's not a matter of block or allow. It's a matter of, hey, this looks like a human. This looks like a bot. Let's make a decision that is best for our business and our sensitivity, and move on. And that, I think that's the way security should be, actually. So few recommendations. The first one sounds pretty basic, but it's something that turns out to be very, very difficult for security teams, is build a cross-functional proof of concept team. And this is probably the biggest one. I talk to vendors, I talk to CSOs as part of my job, and what I find is a lot of times security people are in their own little world. We have our own language, but we don't really know how to deal with lines of business. The fraud people, the head of fraud, might have be looking at money, and they don't really, look at technologies. And the operations people are, yet again, a different view of the same things. It turns out, a lot of us have the same issues and the same types of problems, and we want to agree on success metrics, but we have different ways of measuring that. So I think it's really, really key that you build a cross-functional team for POCs and make sure it covers the line of business. And some of the vendors start with line of business, even more than security, but include the operations, IT ops, and networking teams, and the anti-fraud units as well, because they're all going to have a piece of this. And with that, you'll find some agreement on success metrics. Again, probably saying, the easy one is number of bots. Are they good? Are they bad? In my cruise line example, was a case of web scraping. But it's a hard problem. But it's also illustrative of how hard the problem is. If you want good bots, search engines, to come through and give you good rankings, good ratings, you want supply chain partners to come through and get the latest information and help you with your business. But you want to be able to chop off, the unauthorized attacks. So it's a tricky thing. So what you want on your success metrics is, start looking at bots. How many are good, how many are authorized, how many are unauthorized, what the percentages of overall traffic, include help desk calls, include log-on aborts. If you happen to be an e-com type of application, think of the shopping basket. Think of the deal sizes. A lot of times, bots, or if users are having a tough time, then they only grab one or two things. And we've seen that the deal sizes go up. Certainly the completion percentages go up, because a lot of times a bot will come in until it gets to the point of a shopping cart, and then it might, it has the prices it needs and has the information it needs, and then it just sort of drops off. And what you don't realize, or what your business managers may not realize, is once you strip the bots away, there's a real opportunity to do more business with customers, because they've got a bit better intelligence. And the fraud percentage, which generally might take a little bit longer time to get, but that's an important piece. And measure it against a control site. And I've seen this done very, very successfully in the past with web applications. So if you have multiple instances of your site, put your web behavior analytics in front of one instance and not in front of the other, but have the same metrics and compare the traffic, compare the results, and you'll be really impressed within like a week of what the WBA will do for you. And then you can be able to be in a better position to predict the impact it's going to have on your business. So a really important thing there. And lastly, this is my pat on the back. I think you guys are doing the right things. The fact that you're here listening and learning about web behavior analytics and what Distil Networks can do is a good thing. But this is, keep in mind that I like to talk about ROI and alignment with the business. But it turns out when selling security, for whatever reason, ROI is still very low on the list. I mean, security, first and foremost, is preventing damage from attacks, reducing the risk to the business. So as you talk about web behavior analytics, as you talk about some anti-bot capability and some anti-fraud capability, my recommendation is approach it first from a risk standpoint and business requirements. Where it says reputational brand risk here is number 5, to me, that's really the user experience and protecting the user experience. So that's probably the best thing. If you get ROI out of it, from the fraud side of things, or from fewer servers because your performance is going to go up, that's all well and good. But we're still security people, so my suggestion is keep the security stuff front and center as you work cross-functionally to promote this. So with that, I thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back to Curtis and Rami, and I think the Q&A is not far away for us.
Thanks, Eric. I think that was a fantastic overview from a business perspective of what it means, how it's impacting the business, and some of the things we should consider when buying a product in the space. So before we turn it completely over to Q&A, I wanted to just do a quick plug along the lines of the premise that you were talking about in making a buying decision. So Distil is the first easy and accurate way to detect bots versus real people. We focus our business solely around bot detection and mitigation. And if you have a bot problem, we think that we're uniquely positioned to help. There's a lot of different types of tools, as you alluded to, in this category. But of the tools, we're the focused one on bot detection, and we use inline fingerprints to detect malicious bots and fingerprint them, as opposed to relying on playing IP whack-a-mole. We aggregate that knowledge across our entire customer base. Having been in business for 5 years, we have amassed a wealth of knowledge on what malicious bots already exist out there. And we leverage machine learning to be able to predict when behavior is going to be malicious, not waiting for malicious behavior to occur and then react to it. We instead analyze your web traffic, find anomalies, and predict when somebody's going to be malicious. And then we have that feedback mechanism. You talk about the poll results that we had in. One of the things that we do when we suspect that it's a bot coming in, we challenge it with a test, a second test that only a human can answer, whether it's a email validation or randomized types of CAPTCHA. We alternate the types of challenges that we present, but we do so to get feedback on whether or not this is a legitimate user. And that feeds the machine learning algorithm, but allows us to be more aggressive in how we intercept traffic. And we do this to help businesses get an understanding of what bad bot traffic exists across their site, what are they doing, and we've reached a 99% effectivity on identifying and blocking malicious bots. But the most important part is that we want to do this, as you said, Eric, in a way that is easy for the IT team to deploy and doesn't have a huge overhead for the team on managing it. Once you set up the business rules, the business logic of what you want to do with these bots, it's our platform, our software that's going to automatically catch the latest bots without you going in and tweaking it every single day. And on that note, you mentioned earlier that not only should you have cross-organizational understanding of what a POC should look like and agree on success metrics, you should try it. You should measure and test and understand what's happening and validate your assumptions. Well, we want to give everybody on this webinar an opportunity to do that. And to do that, we're giving 2 months of free service along with a free traffic analysis so that you can sit down and at least have a better understanding of what your web traffic looks like, what the bad bots are doing, and make an informed decision about whether or not the bad bots are impacting you in a way that you should invest in a solution like Distil.
Oh, how cool is that? I didn't know you were going to do that, Rami. That's pretty good.
So I think we have a few questions and a little bit of time to take them. So I'll hand it back to the moderator to see if there's a couple of choice questions that might be applicable.
All right. Thank you, Rami. We appreciate that. And before we get started with today's Q&A, we'd like to ask our audience members to please fill out the feedback form that's just opened on your computer. If your pop-up blockers have prevented the form from launching on your computer, you can click the red survey icon at the bottom of the screen. To complete the form, please press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page. We thank you in advance for taking the time to fill out the feedback form. Your participation in this survey will allow us to better serve you. And now, on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window or click the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. Then be sure to click the Submit button. Now, we're going to begin with a general question that's come in. And Rami, I'm going to ask this to you first, but the audience member says, can you tell us a little more about botnets themselves, what they are precisely, and how they can hurt you?
So botnets, that's a great question. Botnets are a group of bots that have been created through malware or taking over end-user computers. So there's a number of ways in which bad guys can deploy bots. They can deploy them in cloud infrastructures. They can create them on local machines. Oftentimes, though, what they do is they use some sort of malware to install bots on end-user computers. That makes them harder to detect. And botnets are just a grouping of that. It's not effective to have one bot at a time. Instead, it's the bad guys like to distribute their attack, and so they create a cluster of bots together, and that's what a botnet is.
Yeah, and there's a bit of economy there. So botnets really enable low and slow attacks, and this is why the vendors are responsive to what's going on. So there could be 10,000 members of the botnet, each doing 2 or 3 requests at a time. But that translates to like 30,000 requests hitting your website. But it looks like it's 30,000 users, and it gets very, very difficult for your website to be able to determine, hey, are these users or not? So that's kind of what makes botnets special. Is the attackers rent out time, they download code, and off they go and get the results.
Very good, and I've got to like any malware answer that involves a term out of barbecue. That's a good step forward. The next question is one about a term that was used. And Rami, I believe that it was you that was using this term. You mentioned it, browser validation, or spoofing by validating each incoming request as self-reported. And the question is, self-reporting. What is self-reporting in this context?
So in any sort of web transaction, the web server and the incoming infrastructure gets a data set from the user that the user sends back about what it is. So it identifies the type of browser. It says that this is mobile or a desktop. It says these are the languages I understand, and this is the operating system that I'm running on. And there's a list of different headers that get passed back to the web infrastructure from the user. Now, a lot of times bots are lying about who they are. They don't come in and raise their hand and say, I'm a bot. Instead, they spoof these headers and say, I'm just Chrome running on a Windows machine. But this information is voluntarily given up. It's easy to spoof for the bots. And so it's important to not take that at face value. The self-reporting aspect is that they can set it to be whatever they want. They can say, I'm a teacup coming in on a Windows machine. And oftentimes, the web infrastructure doesn't do anything with that. So whether it says something legitimate or illegitimate, it's important to interrogate that and validate that it truly is exactly what they say they are, that they're not lying about their identity.
All right. Very good. Now, Rami, this one's coming back to you because it's someone who says that they really would have liked to understand more about exactly what it is your system is doing. Are there tracking codes? Is there a DNS change required? Can you give just a brief look at how your system works and what the customer has to do to make it work on their system?
So we have a number of different deployment options. We want to make this as easy as possible, and oftentimes it's the security team or the infrastructure team that's deploying the technology. So we didn't want to burden them with code that they had to integrate into their web app. That way you don't have to go back to your engineers or your developers. Instead, we sit in line with your web traffic, and there's a number of ways you can do that. You can either use our cloud option, using a DNS change to route your traffic through us. We can scrub the bot traffic and then send the remainder of the good traffic back to you. Or you can deploy us in a private instance behind your firewall as an inline device within your infrastructure. So a physical or virtual appliance that we give you that lets us to plug and play and detect the bots within your DMZ.
We appreciate that detail. And Eric, our next question, I want to come to you first. We'll get Rami to answer it as well. But the question is sort of a belt and suspenders approach. Do you recommend having both a WAF and a dedicated anti-bot solution like Distil?
Aha. Well, I definitely recommend if you have a WAF, then keep using it. Don't get rid of it. I think you definitely need a WBA solution like Distil. I think in my opinion, there's no question about that at all. And if you're a new company and you have to choose, I would definitely look at the WBA first, and then think of vulnerability scanning of my web app code, because most of the issues with a WAF, and this is why they're placed in audit mode, most of the things the WAF finds are going to be fixed in the software. It's going to generate a request back to engineering and to be fixed in the code. So they kind of do different things, Curtis. So I don't see WBAs replacing WAFs, at least not yet. It may happen, but not today. So there you go. If you're a new company, then I would say go web behavior, because that actually is going to protect more of your business and more of your website, and then look at the code for some of the detailed vulnerability and exploit issues your website might have. Go ahead, Ronnie. I'm good.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Eric. I think the use cases are different between a WAF and one of a vendor in the web behavior analytics space. And oftentimes, I think we've talked about this, the web behavior analytics space, and detecting bots, there's usually a meaningful business reason behind this. And that's why, as you alluded to, Eric, you should have multiple stakeholders at the table, because it's not just an infrastructure issue or a security issue. It also can have really important business implications. And so oftentimes WAFs are just for compliance, or they're passively detecting vulnerabilities in the web application that you can patch within the application itself, whereas the web behavior analytics, no matter what you write your application to do, you're not going to be able to address some of the concerns that are brought up there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, we have time for one more very quick question. This is another question of definition, and Eric, we'll come to you first on this. What is fingerprinting?
Oh, is that all? A fingerprinting is sensing the configuration. It's actually probing and building a profile of the device and the browser and the software that is accessing the system. So it's operating systems, it's some of the network configurations. The premise is that computers, no two machines look alike. We all have different applications we run, and they're all at different levels. And fingerprinting might be, I've seen 256, that's a nice even number, type of attributes that get collected. And so the intersection of those, the union of those, really represents the fingerprint for that device, and allows the web behavior analytics a little bit more information in determining if it's a repeat visitor, and if that repeat visitor has a history of fraud or a history of bad activity. And it just helps in that type of layered approach.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head, Eric. I think, when you think about it, this is the evolution of tracking users. For the longest time, we've been tracking users based on IPs, but unfortunately, that's not granular enough. It's too easy to manipulate your IP, and that makes it very difficult for security professionals to do their job, and that's where the advent of fingerprinting came in. Let's get more unique in identifying a user in a way that they can't hide from us as easily, and that allows us to identify who's good, who's bad in a better way.
All right, and we've just heard from the officials that we're in the spirit of the Copa Americas in stoppage time, so we're going to go do one more question before we have to say goodbye today. And this is really a good forward-looking question. How do we protect ourselves from mass attacks when we migrate to IPv6? Will access control lists be able to keep up? Will the entire mechanism have to change? Rami, let's go to you first on this. What does IPv6 do to the whole bot threat landscape?
It makes it that much harder to identify malicious actors. IPv6 is going to exponentially increase the amount of IP space that exists, meaning that there's more places for the bots to hide. And unfortunately, access control lists just don't work. Having the I'm going to block this set of people when there's so many other places that they can come in from is not an effective tool. It's not an effective tool in IPv4, and it's going to get worse in IPv6. So our recommendation is that you should not be relying on ACLs for blocking bots now, and it's definitely going to become more and more ineffective as we move to IPv6.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. The size of the problem of static structures just gets worse. I mean, the number of IP addresses gets out of hand, and being able to administer access control lists is going to be hugely difficult. You need to be able to start, and now's actually the time to start getting educated, getting used to technologies that are a bit more automated in how they scale and how they deliver their security services. You're spot on, Rami.
Well, I'm afraid with that we have hit the end of our time for this webinar, but I would like to let our audience know that for more information related to today's webinar, you can visit any of the resource links that are now opening before you. In addition, within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. We'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar, A Human, a Bot, Application Firewalls WAFs versus Web Behavior Analytics for finding the biggest threats to your website, brought to you by Dark Reading and Distil Networks. This webinar is copyright 2016 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Sumo Logic, and individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Eric and Rami, I'm Curtis Franklin. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.